And I wanted to thank the witnesses for being here. A lot of work goes into preparing for these, I know, and a lot of work goes into doing the jobs that you do. I also want to thank our staff that helps put on these committee hearings. Again, a lot of work, and I know the members pour themselves into preparing for this, so thank the members as well. Director Wray, I want to thank you today for your honest admission that the risk is increased secondary to this war. And you also said in questioning by me, or from me, that this known got away group is a big, huge question mark, that there are no guarantees, and so thus there's an increased risk from that. The question is, how did we get to those known and unknown gotaways so large, well over 300%? I mean, you can add up the last two presidencies in this just 3 years. It exceeds the last 12 years. Well, as I said earlier, I think policies were working. They were removed. People tested the system. They realized you could get in and just be released. They called home, and millions came. This migration crisis is a self-inflicted crisis, one we created by the change of our policies, and it's put Americans at increased risk, as you've acknowledged. And I think I used in my opening statement the analogy of the college bar that stops carding. That bar will be overwhelmed. I think we all get that. And that's what's happened at our southern border. With mass waves of cartels, with this mass wave of people, the cartels have seized the opportunity to overwhelm Customs and Border Patrol and bypass them and get the fentanyl into the United States. How else could we explain the fact that fentanyl was $95 a hit on the street when this Secretary Mayorkas came into office, and it's now $25, $26 a hit in Tennessee? It's simple supply-demand. These catch and release policies that Mr. Mayorkas, I think has implemented is the cause of the problem. And, you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't, with the way these catch and release policies are working now, and that's really what happens. You look at the CBP One app, they're only getting rid of, I think 98% of the people who do that get to come into the country. So if you get to come into the country, why wouldn't you just turn yourself into Customs and Border Patrol? Why would somebody even go around Customs and Border Patrol now? Because you're going to come in, get parole, and get into the country. Well, it's because they don't want to be caught. And that scares us even more, considering that it's 2 million people. I also want to thank you, Mr. Wray. You admitted that your department is looking for people right now on the known terrorist watch list. I think your question you answered to Mr. Pfluger. And Mr. Mayorkas kind of didn't really answer the question on whether or not if they identified somebody, 100% of the time they kept them. There was some discussion about a system that was implemented to determine if the person was a risk. We know, because we talked to the Customs and Border Patrol agents, that there is no policy that if they're caught on a terrorist watch list, that they're immediately detained in 100% of the cases. So these policies not to do that, which make no sense to us, have put Americans at risk. And interestingly enough, your agents, who are now having to find these individuals somewhere in our country, those decisions, those policies not only put the American citizens at risk, they put your agents at risk because they're out there now having to find these individuals. The truth is, the current policy in the Department of Homeland Security does not require immediate detention of these people, and that is wrong. I asked Director Wray if the policies of his colleagues are making it worse for the FBI. That was one of my questions. And you kind of, I get it, professionalism, you walked around that question. But I think it's clear to every American that these policies at our southern border that are willful decisions, those changed policies, have increased the risk of not only the Americans in this country, but also the law enforcement all over this country, to include the FBI. Now, I want to take issue with several of the comments that my colleagues on the minority side have said, some of their accusations today. The ranking member said that Republicans were AWOL. Now, I'm a military guy. That term means something to me. AWOL is an acronym that stands for absent without leave. meaning you don't show up for your place of duty. In my recollection, in all of our committee hearings, the only time someone didn't show up to a hearing was when the Democrats refused to show up at a border hearing. When we had a hearing on the border, all the Republicans were there, not a single Democrat showed up. So as far as I'm concerned, there's never been a time when Republicans have been AWOL, but there certainly was a time when the Democrats were AWOL. The ranking member also said that a lot of the discussion we've had is a difference in policies and things like that. I have to tell you, I agree on some of that. But it's pretty clear that Americans are at risk by decisions that have been made, and there's nothing wrong with us investigating that and pointing it out to the American people and trying to find the cause, and if those decisions have put Americans at risk, holding people accountable. Today, the ranking member, very interestingly, didn't mention Hamas in his opening statement, didn't mention Hezbollah, he didn't mention the cartels, he didn't mention the CCP. The only thing he seemed to want to talk about was the MAGA Republicans and President Trump. I find that interesting, and I'd like to point that out for the record, that in our World Threats hearing, the ranking member didn't talk about any of that. The ranking member suggested that we have a member in our party that wants to defund the FBI. We're not defunding the FBI. But I'll tell you, some of their members want to defund ICE. Have said it many times on the record, more than just one. We had one member of our side that said to defund many of them have wanted to defund ICE. And they've talked about defunding law enforcement all across this country for years. So I was a little offended by the fact that he brought that up, but I wanted to set the record straight on that one. The ranking member also suggested that we are criticizing the men and women of your departments. And I would never do that. I worked for a lot of great military leaders in the day, my time in the Army, and but occasionally we had a guy that, a leader that was not effective. And I'd never be critical of that unit's soldiers, always the leader. Our criticism's not the men and women of DHS, Mr. Secretary. Our criticisms are your policies that you've implemented that changed everything when you came into office and changed the flood of migration and changed the fentanyl flow into this country. And tragically now with a war in the Middle East and heightened risk to the United States because we're supporting their other great enemy, Israel, at much greater risk. I also want to correct this notion because it keeps coming up that 90% of the fentanyl is being caught. Well, that's not true. 90% of what comes across the border that is caught at the crossing sites. That's an accurate statement. But to say that you're catching 90% of the fentanyl, you don't know the denominator, you can't figure the percentage. I wish people would be intellectually accurate when they make statements, but they just seem to cling to things that aren't true. There's also this accusation that just because people want border security that we're somehow racist. We heard that again today. And you would think that would just get tired and be thrown out. The people coming across the southern border, when I was there was a huge group of Russians. They're whiter than I am. This notion that you're somehow racist because you want border security it's really insane. I can assure you this, the people who are all over this nation right now yelling from the river to the sea, the destruction of Israel, I'll eat that Red Bull can if there's a Republican in that group. I also want to thank you, Ms. Abizaid. You brought up the homegrown and the lone wolves and all this stuff, and you gave some really compelling testimony. I'm from Tennessee, and what happened in Chattanooga several years ago at that recruiting station is just an example of what you're talking about. Keep saying that over and over again. America needs to know about this. They are actively trying to flip people in our country and to convince them to hurt Americans. And that incident in Chattanooga, we in Tennessee will never forget it. And I thank you for bringing that point home. Now, Mr. Mayorkas has said that we need to add dollars. Well, the truth of the matter is there was no budget change between the last administration and this administration, but you can look at the graph. It's like this and then like this. It ain't about dollars, although we're not against. If you look in H.R. 2, we put more dollars into that. Technology, pay for Border Patrol people, despite what some people have said. You also mentioned, Mr. Mayorkas, immigration laws. And yes, they're broken. They need to get fixed. But the truth of the matter is that the Immigration and Nationality Act's being subverted right now. You're not even, courts have ordered you to do it a different way than you're doing it. So I'm not even sure if we did change the immigration laws, you'd even abide by them. The ranking member mentioned that the asylum laws, we need to change that. But we're not living according to the definition of the asylum laws now and detaining people. We're actually sending them to hotels and sending them away while ICE detention beds sit empty, despite what the law says. More resources? No, this is a policy issue. The policies were changed by the Secretary, and the results are people came, some on the terrorist watch list, being chased by the FBI, loose in our country, thousands dead to fentanyl, millions disrupted by the cartel crime, thousands of children lost in the system, thousands of people trafficked, and billions of taxpayer dollars. The New York mayor, who happens to be a Democrat, says it's going to cost his city $12 billion. Right out of the taxpayer dollar, not at their choice. They didn't vote on this. You just moved the policies out of the way. Here, let me write the check, because that's what Mr. Mayorkas wants us to do. And now, as I said, with the conflict in Israel, we are faced with an open border coupled with a heightened threat as we give assistance to as I said, the only other country or group of people that the terrorists hate more than us, Israel. The abysmal failure to secure our southern border has put every American at risk. Even a baby crawling around on the floor of a VRBO who encounters fentanyl left by the previous renter, dead. To crime, to human trafficking, to billions of money going to some of the worst human beings on the planet, cartels, and now, of course, international terrorists. I want to, before I finish my comments, I want to say a few things because you guys have raised some really good points, and I want to just give you some assurances. CFATS, the House passed it. We're pushing the Senate. We have a CFATS working group to try to get it in a posture where the Senate will actually approve it, but that side of the building is controlled by another party. We passed it over here. We're waiting on them. No, we're actually trying to get it in a posture that they'll actually support. UAS, we're working very diligently to get that done. You're right, Director. FISA, there's a special committee that is working on this. I promise you that will get done. The CWMD, of course, was on the CR that just passed. So it's done. It's over on the Senate side waiting. Those are very valiant, I agree with you. Those things need to be taken care of. We're working on it. Mr. Ray, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Abbott, thank you. Mr. Mayorkas, thank you. I know you rearranged your schedule to stay a little later, and I get that, and I deeply appreciate it. And it's clear that you believe you're doing a great job, and I'm not hiding it. We're looking into all this because we on our side think that you're not. And we're in our last phase of a 5-phase process that you're following in the press, just like the rest of my constituents and people across the country. We're going to finish that up, I think, sometime around December. And I'd love to know today if you'd commit to come back. We'll finish that thing out, I think maybe in December. Does that sound reasonable to you? Will you be able to come back for that?
I will honor the request of this committee.
Thank you. Again, I want to reiterate my point about the people of your departments. It's hard work protecting this country, protecting the citizens of this country, and I know the men and women who do that professionally as a career deserve the utmost of our respect. and every one of them has it from us. Our frustrations are not with them. It's not. It's with leadership that we think has made bad decisions. And with that, I'm concluding my closing remarks. The members of this committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'd ask that the witnesses respond to those in writing if you get any. And pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days for those written statements. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.